So if you go on my Upwork profile, I just hit $30,000 in total earnings, and I also just hit $45,000 from some of my other clients, which is all crazy to me because I just started April 2023 of last year, and I remember like at this time, I had absolutely no idea what I was doing, and now I'm at this mark. So it's kind of crazy to me. So in this video, I kind of wanted to share some tips and advice that I wish I knew when I was getting started, and hopefully this can help some people. All right, so my first tip is to be patient. A lot of people they'll watch these videos, and like people like me, I'm part of this too, but people will look at other people and their success stories, how I signed my first client in my first 3 days, or how I signed my first client in the first couple weeks or the first month or whatever it is. And then when it doesn't happen for them, they get kind of down, and they kind of give up. So my number one thing is to be patient. For me, when I signed my first client, like, I was really lucky. She just happened to really like my portfolio. Like, after my first client, it took me like another 3 weeks to sign my second client, and then like another month to get my third. And then from there, it like until month 4, 5 was when I actually started like getting clients on a consistent basis. So my number one thing is to be patient. Make sure you're doing things right. Have a good profile, have a good portfolio, have a good cover letter. But once you have that, don't get discouraged from lack of responses or a lack of results, especially in the beginning stages. But just patience. Make sure you're doing things right. Like, I've hired people on Upwork as well, just to find different team members. So I've listed jobs, like trying to find team members to work with, and some of the proposals that I've gotten from these people are like, they're so bad. It's like an example. It's like the guy just had hi, and then like he didn't even have my name, but it said hi, and then had the bracket, and it said insert name here, bracket, and then it had like a chat GPT, clearly a chat GPT proposal letter. But yeah, be patient. Make sure you have a really strong profile, a really good portfolio. I know there's not a lot you can do, especially in the beginning when you lack the experience, but at the very least, you can make sure you have a really good cover letter, like something that's well written. Don't just pull something from ChatGPT. Actually spend the time to write it yourself. When you're starting out, I would say like hand write one for each client, so that it's unique. Because you got to put yourself in the client's perspective, and you got to ask yourself, like, if I received this message, would I respond to it? Would I, read through it? I think you'll find a lot of the times you can make a lot of improvements with your portfolios, with your cover letters, and a lot of people don't do that. They skip over it. So I think that's pretty important. But yeah, the overall message is to just stick with it, be patient, understand that this stuff, it does take time. So this next piece of advice kind of ties into the first one, which is to be patient, but it's to stop worrying so much. So for me, I get overly anxious. I tend to overcomplicate things and make things a lot worse than what they actually are. So for me, what I found to work best is to just stop worrying about things. I was always afraid of not getting a response back from a client, or losing a client, or not having things work out exactly how I planned them to. And I think I found that a lot of the times it doesn't end up working exactly how I wanted it to. So the best possible thing you can do is to just kind of not worry about it. Don't just ignore it. Take it, make improvements, and do the best that you can. But once you do the best that you can, that's all you can do. So you kind of just have to leave it there. The best thing you can do is just not really concern yourself with it and move on if it just doesn't work out right. So for example, I put up a video yesterday talking about, or not yesterday, a couple days ago, talking about how one of my freelancers ghosted me, or one of my team members, and they ended up responding back. Like, as soon as I put the video up, a couple hours later, they responded back, and then now we're back on track, and everything's good. Whenever you're coming across something like a predicament, or something pops up while you're like running your business, which is going to happen, the best thing you could do is look at 3 possible scenarios. So the first scenario is the worst case scenario. So you need to think, whatever predicament you're in, you need to think of the absolute worst possible case scenario, right? And then what you'll find is, when you do that, you'll find that a lot of the times the absolute worst case scenario, like, you can live with it. It's not as bad as you might think it'll be, if you actually sit down and think about it. So for me, for example, the absolute worst case scenario in my last video's case was, my team member never responds back to me and I lose the client. Like, that's the absolute worst case scenario. But like, thinking about it, like, that's not that bad. You lose a client, there's always more clients. You can, hire a new team member. I think you'll find that can really kind of help calm the nerves down, help you make more rational decisions. So that's step number 1. Number 2 is you look at the absolute best case scenario, right? And for that, the best case scenario would be the team member responds back, everything's okay with the client, and no issues, right? That's the absolute best case scenario, and that's what ended up happening. So it's crazy, because I'm constantly worried about the worst case scenario. But the more I think about the worst case scenario, I find that it's not that bad, and it's not something that I should be overly worrying about. And then I think about the best case scenario, and then it ends up being, more likely to happen than the worst case scenario. And that kind of leads me to the third scenario that you should think about, which is the most likely scenario. So you'll find majority of the times, like, or at least for me, the best case scenario and the most likely scenario, those are the scenarios that happen. Like, very rarely does the worst case scenario ever happen for me. And even if it does, again, like, the worst case scenario is always, or it's never that bad. I end up losing the client. So that's, most of the time, that's the worst case scenario. And I understand that in the beginning, every client, or you're trying to sign and maintain every client for as long as possible, and I understand that. But if you're going to be in this business model for a long time, you got to understand that there's a lot of people that are looking for the service that you offer. You can't really be tying yourself down to just that one client if it's going to hold you back from growing or whatever. So my final piece of advice for anyone looking to get started with their SMMA is to simply just get started. Like, that is the best thing you can do. Get started. Don't worry about all the problems you're going to come across. When they come, you'll find a way to solve it and overcome it. Just get started. Send out your first proposal, send out your first DM or message or whatever it is. Create your profile or your portfolio. write up your cover letter, like start as soon as possible. For me, as soon as I found out about SMMA, I spent a couple weeks just like trying to study and make sure everything's perfect before actually starting any of my outreach. I wish I started like a lot sooner. So yeah, those are my 3 biggest tips for anyone looking to get started with their SMMA.